Welcome back to a new episode of the Elevate Your Running podcast. I am joined by my co-host, Sarah Manderscheid, and my name is Austin Myers. We are on episode number 35, and we are really excited that you have chosen to join us today, wherever you're listening from. We've got a really exciting episode for you, one that we're really looking forward to having a discussion on, because it's going to allow us to reflect on our earlier days of running and our first marathon prep experience, which if you've run a marathon before, you probably look back on that marathon prep and your build up to your first attempt at 26.2 miles very fondly, because I know that we do. And there's just nothing like it. There's nothing like the build up to that first opportunity to run a marathon and how it feels on race day to achieve that goal that you work towards. So that's what we're going to discuss today. We're going to break down some of the things that we learned, some of the insights that we can provide for people, whether you're training for your first marathon or your second or third or whatever number you're on. We are always in the process of learning and becoming better, stronger runners. That's what we're here to help you do. So, Sarah, first and foremost, how are you this week? I know you are in taper for the Chicago Marathon, which is awesome. I think that you should be very confident leading into that race because you've had an awesome buildup.
Hi, everyone. Hi, Austin. That's so nice to say. Yes, I'm in taper. It feels really good. It's a pretty heavy taper for the first week of 3, so I'm really surprised about that. And we're cutting almost 20 miles off right out of the start. So it's going to be a really interesting taper. I hope my body responds. I know my body's going to respond. This has been an incredible training cycle. I haven't talked too much about it on social media or this podcast, but it has been truly one of my favorites. And I feel really comfortable and ready to hit the pace that we're targeting, which feels really good. And it's a feeling I've never had before. So that feels really good. And I still have a few workouts to get through and even a workout on Saturday. So it's not quite there yet. But today I'm also taking over the Houston Marathon Instagram stories. And I get a little carried away. This is my second year, and there's probably like 40 stories up for the day. So there's a lot of content. So I know we're releasing this on Thursday, but I'll be saving everything and sharing it in different ways throughout the next few months. But it's been a lot of fun to connect with the Houston community. And Brandon and Phil, my athletes, are having a lot of fun with the Q&A portion of the stories right now. So that's been great. And then also piggybacking off the topic for today, race strategy calls are in full force for the Elevate team. And that is really, truly like such a great elevated moment for me. I got to connect with some first time marathoners today. All the Elevate athletes get to watch a video or listen to a video on all things marathon taper. So when we get to the race strategy call, we're talking very specific, like pacing, nutrition, hydration on race day, and really dialing that in. So that's been a lot of fun and such a great way to kind of like spend the day talking to athletes on their first marathon attempts or their first marathons that they're going to finish. And then also we get to talk about what we should know for our first marathon training cycle and all the good things there. I do have 2 elevated moments to share from our audience, though, that came in over the last week. So thank you so much for that. Our first one is that we have a gentleman from Instagram. He said he ran a 5K for 9/11 and he beat his goal time by over 2 minutes. He didn't specifically train for the distance, but he's a combat wounded veteran. So running for him is very hit or miss. So he was very, very happy to be able to run a 5K PR by over 2 minutes, which is incredible. So that's amazing. Love hearing that. And Elevate athlete Terry sent in a note through Final Surge, and she said that she used her mental strategies that we've been working on through coaching conversations to be more successful with her run and finish it feeling strong and happy. And she used the mantras and she just felt like it was such a great elevated moment for her because she was able to get through the run feeling strong, which is such a great win. Terry's been battling some injuries and we're finally getting back to a really good place. And she's amazing and awesome. And um, if you tuned into the Houston Marathon Instagram stories, Terry is my favorite. So there's that. Just kidding. But Terry, I do love you. There's a favorite thing going on right now. So, anyways, Austin, I'd love to hear your elevated moment for the week.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much to our listeners for sharing those elevated moments. I know, when we first began this podcast, we wanted something as a way to introduce the week and our celebrations for running or just life. And in the beginning, we were very good about asking for your elevated moments. We asked you to send them to our elevateyourrunning@gmail.com email address or share them on social media. And since that point, we've kind of lost that aspect of it. We certainly share ours each week. But if you ever have an elevated moment, or every single week when you have an elevated moment, if you'd like to share those with us through any means that is best for you, that is so great to hear. I love hearing the celebrations that you all have from running and life. For me, my elevated moment is really, the culmination of some struggle over the past few weeks with my running, and now being in my third marathon prep. It's an interesting feeling because, as we've talked about on previous episodes of this podcast, I was able to achieve a really big goal of mine in the Buffalo, New York marathon this past May, and that was to run a sub 3 hour marathon. And I was not expecting to run a 2:58 marathon in Buffalo. I was actually expecting to run close to 3 hours, but above 3 hours. And then my plan was to train for a sub 3 hour marathon for New York City. And fortunately, I was able to run that sub 3 hour marathon in Buffalo. But it's really put me in an interesting place as I'm now preparing for New York City, because some of that excitement towards the marathon prep and the passion towards pursuing a goal just isn't there. It's not there in the same way that I've felt it in the past. And that's not really something that I'm typically very open about sharing. And I really haven't been throughout this process, but it is an elevated moment for me to recognize that. And I've always been very in tune with pursuing things that excite me, because ultimately that's where my best work comes out. And as I'm now training and running in preparation for the New York City Marathon on November 6th, the idea of running a PR or running something in the mid to low 250s is just something that at this time in my life, number one, doesn't necessarily fit at the top of my priority list, as I'm currently working in a new job that I really want to excel in. We've made a big move to Texas, and there's a lot of areas of my life that I do want to perform at a high level within. And running, because of that, has more so become something that I do as a part of my lifestyle, as opposed to being a really big area of goal pursuit and achievement. So really, as I'm now preparing for the New York City Marathon, it's less about trying to run a PR and more about just loving running and all that it provides my life. And I think that on November 6th in New York City, the goal is to just enjoy it and to enjoy that entire trip and to not worry about the time on the clock. I'm still going to run hard and I'm still going to have fun. And I'm thinking about carrying a GoPro and just documenting the experience of running throughout New York City. And I also have other goals that I'm interested in pursuing, both in running and in strength training and overall fitness ability. So for me, it's just really the elevated moment of that. And the lesson that I've learned over these past few weeks is just tapping into what excites you and living through that, because we can only function off of, the goals that we feel like we should be pursuing for so long. I think that it's really easy to say, okay, I ran this time or I ran this distance. Now I have to best it. and you really don't have to do anything. You get to choose to train hard for something. And if it's not something that you truly want to do, then you will find yourself not working as hard or out of as much passion as you may have done with something in the past that you were truly excited about. So I kind of just went on a tangent there. But that
No,
is
that was
my
great.
understanding.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really, really proud of you, Austin. I think it does take a lot of strength and a lot of courage to have a goal and then, maybe halfway through the training cycle realize like the goal has actually shifted and you get to be surrounded in your new environment with Abby, really investing in your career and everything that you get to do there. And I think that that's amazing, and you're still gonna have a really great time in New York. That's an amazing course, and, like, I've heard it's a lot of fun too, um, and you get to kinda take that extra stress or that extra pressure off, for sure. And for the record, I definitely knew you could run sub 3 at Buffalo. I definitely knew you could,
Yeah.
and you did
I
it.
mean, and you were an amazing coach in that process. And I think the beautiful thing about, that training cycle, and I do hope to feel this again in the future in a future marathon prep, is that you just see the hard work really come to fruition over the course of weeks and months. And if you've never felt that, as we kind of shift to our conversation today of talking about our first marathon prep experience and kind of being a beginner runner, or at least a beginner marathon runner, if you are at that point and maybe you're training for your first marathon or you're considering training for your first half or full marathon, just know that the things that you're going to learn about yourself and the things that you're going to prove to yourself are going to be so powerful. I'll never, at least not in the near future, forget that marathon training process at this past training cycle, because it was such a crazy time of my life where I was trying to figure things out. And in that moment, I showed myself what I could do with hard work, dedication, and consistency. And that, if nothing else, is what running teaches me every single day. So, regardless of whether I'm training for a huge goal or not, running is always going to be a central part of my life. And I really know that that's why we began this podcast, because we both love running so much, and it
Yeah.
just helps us so much in our lives. So, with all of that being said, we would like to shift to our topic of the day because it is a fun one. And the first marathon training experience, there is nothing like it, because you are going in and it can be a very daunting goal, and it can be something that you put on your calendar potentially a year or more in advance, because it takes so long to build up to that 26.2 distance and to feel confident within it. But when you do, it's an amazing feeling. So, Sarah, if you would like to kick us off today with something that you learned in your first marathon training experience, and if you could give us maybe a little bit of context about when that was and what marathon you were training for, that would be awesome too.
Absolutely. So I trained for the California International Marathon a little over 3 years ago. I actually started on September 10th of 2019. Um, and I hired a coach. And as full circle as it is, I am back with her, working with her for Chicago. So I hired Nell Rojas, and it was great. I had come to find her, or I found her through a podcast that I discovered at my running retreat earlier that summer. And at that point, I had ran a pretty good half marathon. I think I was at like 137, 138. I knew like, and I wasn't really running consistently. I was not a run coach at this point. Um, and I loved running, but I also knew that I was starting this new chapter, this new season in my life where I was going to be very busy. And I didn't have the time to put together my own training plan. And I really didn't know what I should do to set myself up for success. So Nell and I partnered together and we got to work together for CIM. And that's in Sacramento. It takes place usually the first Sunday in December. So very much like Chicago, we had 12 weeks exactly. Chicago and CIM, 12 weeks of work to put together a good race. So um, my intent was to Boston qualify in my first marathon. I thought if I'm going to do this, I'm going to go all in. I'm going to hire a coach. I'm going to be consistent. I work out every day anyways. This isn't going to be a huge change. But what I discovered is that it was a huge change. And, like, so that's our first topic. So, or our first point that we'd like to talk about. It takes more time than you think. So, I ended up running, and everyone's going to be different for a marathon, but you really need to be running at least 5 runs, 5 days, 5 days, maybe 6 runs, or 7 runs, depending if you're doubling. 5 or 6 days with some doubles in there if your body can support them. Maybe not for your first marathon. I think I actually did have doubles in my first marathon, but that's besides the point. I had gotten to a point in my half marathon time where I could do that. But when people are just starting to get into running, I wouldn't do any extra doubles or extra stress or extra work like that. So 5 or 6 days a week. My seventh day included 90 minutes of cycling every single week. And I thought I can do this because I work out every day. But I guess I really didn't work out every day because it took a lot of time. And it's not just the running piece to it, right? We've talked on this podcast a lot about all the other 1% things that you get to do in training. So you also get to you also get to do a lot of mobility and stretching before you start running. You get to prioritize your nutrition, which is going to be another point that we talk about at some point today. Hydration and getting your fueling down while running, as well as strength training and stretching afterwards, and the massage or the Epsom salt baths. Like, there's so many other things that can go into it. So at the end of the day, if you're thinking about running a marathon, my invitation to you is to think about how much time you can give, and know that, like, if you have a 60-minute run most days outside of the long run, maybe buffer in 80 to 90 minutes per day, because that's really what it's going to take. The long runs actually do take half of a day, people. Like, I really thought, I mean, how many of us have heard that? Like, the long runs can take half of your day. I really thought that wasn't going to be me. And I would get up for my first, I would do all my long runs at like 6:30 in the morning for CIM. But you're really getting done if you're going up to 3 hours, like maybe 9:30, 9:45. You're stretching, you're eating, you're showering. At that point, it's already 11. You're probably going to bed pretty early. So that is kind of half of a day ish. Um, so that's kind of the biggest thing, or the biggest piece in my mind.
Yeah, that's a really great point, and something that I definitely learned throughout my first process as well. You know, the context around my first marathon is it was at a point in my life a little bit different than your situation, Sarah, where I actually was shifting to a point where I had more free time than I had previously, um, been able to use, because I had recently left my career as a teacher. We moved to Colorado, which is where you and I met. This is a story that, we've definitely told multiple times on the podcast, but the point of it is that I had more time, and I was pretty strategic about that because I decided to run my first marathon, giving myself an entire 16, 18 weeks to train for it, and basically building my life around when I was going to train and how I was going to recover, and embracing the fact that I was going to learn throughout the process. So I did not use a coach for my first marathon prep. I actually, used a pretty basic marathon training plan, and just embrace the fact that I could learn throughout that. I could be flexible, and I could get connected with people like you, Sarah, and the groups that you put together for long runs and track workouts and all that you do with Elevate Your Running. And that was really a big point for me, is that community is huge in running, and really just in pursuing a goal. Coming to Colorado to train for my first marathon was just an amazing experience, not just because you get to have the views of the mountains and the amazing fall weather, which I'm currently missing horribly as I'm in
Mhm.
Texas, and it's like a high of 98 every single day, and we're near the end of September. But Colorado has an awesome running community and triathlon community, and so many different communities that you can get plugged in with. And for me as a new runner and really just new to marathon training, that allowed me to ask questions. That allowed me to learn from other people, to join other people on long runs. Like I joined you all multiple times, Sarah, see new places. Like it was huge for me in the process of falling in love with running. And that for me was something that will always stand out. Community does matter. So my encouragement to anyone listening, especially if you're in an earlier stage of your marathon training or your running career, get plugged in with a community of any sort, because it will help you. And I think that's evidenced even in professional runners. Like professional runners, for the most part, have teams. They train with other people at least once a week. And typically they train with other people on those bigger days. So a workout day, a
Mhm.
long run day. These are strategic things that professional runners, the people at the highest level, do. And it carries all the way down to us as people who run just for the love of running recreationally, but still pursuing a goal, whether it be running your first marathon or running a PR in the marathon distance. So get plugged in with the
Yeah.
community. It's absolutely crucial.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I feel like it was Jason Fitzgerald, he said it either at the running retreat or on our podcast, like, just do what the pros are doing, and not in a, like, overachieving sort of way of but, like, if there's a fad going on, like the keto diet, are the elites doing it? Probably not. They're eating what they should be eating to be running higher mileage and sustaining like marathon training. They're also in the gym doing planks and squats and clamshells and, hip and glute strengthening exercises to like really help them to be developed as an athlete. And that's also what we can do ourselves. The other piece to that is that they do train on teams, and that's a huge component to it. They train on workouts, long runs, and then, in Boulder, I get the opportunity to see a lot of elite runners many times when I'm out and about running, and they're running easy together too. And when I trained for CIM, I was so busy that I did all of my training alone, and that's kind of lonely. It's not great. And this go around for Chicago, it's been nice because I've had time by myself on easy efforts, on workout days. I'm with Nell and my team in Boulder, and it's nice that we all have different workouts, but we're pushing each other because we're on the track, so we're all running together anyways. And lastly, like I've had some really great people join me on some of my long runs and helping me pace that goal marathon effort because all of my long runs uh, for the past 6 weeks have had goal pace work in them. And it's been really nice to have a team there to be able to run that pace with me. And so I'm not out there, doing it solo. Although last week, to play devil's advocate, I had a pacer for the first half. I ran 21 miles with a progression, 2 mile warm up, 7 at 8:20, 6 at 8, and then 6 at goal pace. So for the first 10 or 11, I had a pacer with me, and then I was on my own. And I thought that that was really great because then I needed to lean into myself, into my mind, and to push through, flow through, but really it felt like a push through those last 10 miles or so until the end. And it was a great workout.
Yeah. And you mentioned, that was a great workout for so many reasons, 21-mile run. And I think that really what you're going to be able to tap into from that run beyond just the fact that you hit the goal pace, which we'll get into later, the importance of training at your goal marathon pace if you're training for a marathon with a specific time goal. But really what you were able to embrace on that run is the mental side of things. and that confidence building effect that you get from proving to yourself that you can do it and you can show up for yourself in the weeks leading into the race. And because of that, the confidence will be there on race day as well. The marathon is in large part a mental game because 26.2 miles is a long distance, and you can easily, if the mental side of things is not there, you can easily burn out at some point in that race before you reach the finish line. So it's really important to embrace that mental side, and something that we've discussed many times on this podcast and have some really awesome episodes on is that your mental strength is a skill and an attribute that needs to be trained and developed in the same way that your fitness levels need to be trained and developed.
Absolutely. We've talked maybe on this podcast, maybe not, but definitely in stories, the paperclip chain. And Dr. Ross, who is a trained and licensed psychologist, works with elite runners all over the country to talk through mental strength. And every time you have a mental strength win in a workout, on an easy run, on any day that you're training, you string a paperclip together and you take it with you to the start of the race. I think that's a great tangible way to understand that you have been doing the work, because I think sometimes it's very easy to like second guess yourself when you start getting in taper. Like, did I do enough? Am I ready? I'm not sure. But that's a really, really great way to embrace it. And um, we don't actually run the full distance in training, and that requires that we do tap into that mental side and make sure that we have mental wins and we know that we can go to that place in order to run a really strong race. And Nell has done an incredible job getting me there. It was one of the things that we talked about on our intro call of like, I fall apart in marathons at like outside of CIM, the last two that I ran like at 16 or 18 miles, and it's like a nightmare. And if you start to fall apart in the marathon, there's so much time that you lose. So being able to take those workouts and really push through them so you can embrace it when you're out there on the road, and when you're in the race, I think that's a huge, huge piece. The mental side really comes into play the longer that you're running in the race. But it is a really big piece to it. Like you mentioned, Austin, it's trainable. It's something you can practice on every single run. If you follow the Elevate Your Running YouTube channel, we upload our podcast recordings. I also upload info sessions for the Elevate Your Running athletes. And I've had Dr. Justin Ross on before, and I've also talked about it. So feel free to check out those episodes to learn about how to be able to train your mind, even on easy runs and recovery runs. You can do it every single day. And I think that's the coolest piece to the mindset game.
Yeah. You mentioned a really crucial thing, which is, in marathon training, you're not going to run 26 miles as a part of your training cycle. At least that's certainly not a commonly accepted like training approach for a marathon, especially if it's your first marathon. And I remember in my first, marathon prep, I mentioned community. I was fortunate enough to be working at a running store and really just surrounded by people who loved running and also people who had more running experience than I did, especially at the marathon distance. And that was a really popular topic as I was getting closer and closer to my first marathon, which is, what is going to be your longest long run? How far are you going to run? And I didn't really have a concrete answer because, like I mentioned, I didn't have a coach. I was kind of embracing the fact that I was being flexible with my training. That's not to say that I was inconsistent in any way. I was in love with it so much that I really had to tell myself to take a day off each week, but that I was going based off of feel for especially the long runs and some of my easy runs and just my approach to each training week. But the popular question that I had was, what's going to be your longest long run? Where are you going to peak at in preparation for your first marathon? And coming into that, my plan was to peak at 20 miles I had some people recommend 22, and it ended up that I did run 22 in preparation for that race. And I think, many different approaches can work. I know 20 is a popular number for people. 22 is a really great number if it's appropriately placed in your training and its proximity to race day. I think I ran my 22 miler about 4 weeks before the Indianapolis Marathon, maybe 3 weeks. But that allowed me time to taper appropriately. And just understanding coming into a run of 20 or 22 miles that you are going to tax your body. And that is going to, in many ways, because it's your first marathon prep, that's going to simulate the stress that you're going to have on race day. So you're going to feel kind of beat up after that. And Sarah, you may feel that way right now, but I also know that you've been feeling really good as far as your running. And with this being not your first marathon prep, it may certainly be different. But as you enter, 2 weeks or 1 week into the race, you want to allow your body to recover. So whatever distance that you do end up hitting as your long run, it will not be 26 miles. That may be a misconception for people as they come into their first marathon training cycle, but it will certainly be something in that 20 to 22 range, because if nothing else, it's going to provide you with an amazing amount of confidence to know that on race day, you can run 26.2 miles. Now, one thing that's interesting with my first marathon prep, but probably not unique to me, was that I didn't really have a legitimate time goal. I had a time that I wanted to run faster than, but as I continued to progress through marathon training for that first time, it became pretty apparent that I was going to run faster than that time. And I just continued to tell myself your goal on race days to embrace your first marathon, to enjoy the experience, and to run to the best of your ability on that day. But because of that, I didn't have a specific marathon race pace. I didn't have that minute per mile pace that I wanted to run on race day. And for many people coming into their first marathon prep, you may not have that. But I think it is important to target a specific range. And I do remember doing that where I said, I want to run somewhere in this range on specific runs within a long run or within a key training run. Because when we run at goal pace, we are essentially teaching our body that we can run that pace with relative comfort, because you do want to find a level of comfortability and confidence on race day, because 26.2 miles is a long time. And really a misconception for many people may be that you can just grind it out for 26.2 miles. You can be tough enough to run 26.2 miles at your goal pace. And the reality is that you cannot out tough the marathon. You cannot be stronger than the marathon. Your fitness levels will be represented on the race course on any day that you show up to run a marathon, just because of the nature of the distance. So it's important that as you're training for your first marathon, even if you don't have a very specific time goal that you're looking to achieve, try to take an inventory of your fitness level by considering what your easy pace is, by considering what pace you may run a 10K at, and then scale that to the pace that you think is realistic for your 26.2 mile race on the day of your first marathon. And by doing that, you're going to set yourself up for success in the way of confidence on race day so that you can have the best possible experience.
Absolutely. I always say, like, start slow to finish strong. And, some people who have run a marathon might laugh at that because sometimes you don't finish a marathon strong. Sometimes you do. It all kind of depends on, I mean, a lot of different factors. But something to really lean into is the time on feet aspect for a marathon. So, not all athletes will get to 20 miles because it might take them, if they stay in their aerobic zone, it's all easy, it could take them, you know, 3.5, 4, 4.5, 5 hours. And that's way too long. It's way too much stress. And Austin, to your point, you made a great point of like running 20 miles is so much stress on your body that it really is like running a marathon, especially when you're in your first training cycle, the aches and pains that come through that first training cycle, I will say, don't typically repeat after the first one. It's a different feeling once your body has adjusted to that intensity and to that training. Um, so I like to coach athletes up to 3 hours if they're not going, whether they will or won't make 20 miles in 3 hours. You could have, 22 miles in 250, something like that. So it's really 3 hours or up to 22 miles. I've never taken an athlete over that. I feel like 22 miles is a really solid, stressful long run. And with a proper taper, you can really crush a marathon on that or up to 3 hours. So I have some athletes right now running 15 miles in 3 hours, and that's okay. Another way to kind of bulk that weekend is having another longer-ish run on before or after. So that's also another way to kind of help those athletes, or even I've had those too, where they are running quite a bit of mileage within a shorter time span, and it can set them up for success on race day.
Yeah, that's a really valuable perspective. You know, Sarah, you and I have talked in the athlete coach relationship of the value of time-based runs and just what that can do not only for our fitness levels but also the mental side of things, and not being tied to the distance as much as just embracing that you're going to put time on your feet and you're going to fit that amount of time that you're going to be running into
Hmm.
the grander scheme of your day, which I think is really important for people training for their first marathon. Like, there's ways to train for a marathon without dedicating your entire life to it, especially if there's not a strict time goal that you want to achieve and you simply want
Yeah.
to run the distance. Running based off of time as opposed to mileage can be really valuable for you, because as you stack those weeks of training, you're going to come to realize how long it actually takes out of your day to run a 2 hour or 2.5 hour long run. Because like you mentioned earlier in the episode, Sarah, it takes longer than 2.5 hours. Like, you don't
Yeah.
dedicate simply the time running in your day. You dedicate the time preparing, running, recovering, and all of those important factors that go into making you a successful runner.
Yeah, absolutely. Like maybe even traveling for your long run. I've had athletes this summer and fall like go to their race route and run their long runs that might be 45, 60 minutes away from where they live. And I think one, that's super beneficial, and two, it just adds on maybe an extra 2 hours to your day or to your quote unquote workout.
Yeah. Yeah, and one thing that I think is definitely worth mentioning for people who may be training for their first marathon, and I think something that you and I both embraced in our first marathon prep, Sarah, is that as you're running and you're building this mileage, there has to be a balance between simply running and also incorporating some sort of strength training, some sort of mobility and stretching routine, things that are going to not only strengthen your body for the mileage as it increases closer to the marathon, but also allows it to recover. And if you have not listened to episode number 30, the key to better running with Jason Fitzgerald, he was an amazing guest on our podcast because he gave so many great insights to the importance of strength training. And it can be an intimidating topic for many people to say that I'm training for my first marathon and now I have to strength train too. Like, isn't it enough to simply run? And strength training does not have to have a large barrier of entry. So if you are interested in that topic, definitely give episode 30 a listen. There's a lot of great information there from Jason Fitzgerald. But really, the point of it for this episode's purpose is that if you incorporate some sort of strength training, mobility, recovery work into your running, it will make you not only feel better, but it'll make you a better runner. I remember that when I was training for my first marathon, I would do my long runs on Saturdays. And Sarah, like you mentioned, that can take up a lot of time. Some of those long runs, I was traveling to run with your running group for the long runs. So maybe I was getting back home at about 11. So that's a large chunk of your day if I left around 6 or 6:30. And then I was actually choosing later on in that day after some downtime to go to the gym and do something. Now, I wasn't going in the gym and lifting heavy weight on those days and burying myself because I was certainly already taxed from the long run. I wanted to acknowledge that and respect that. But I was getting my body moving. And I think that's an area that a lot of people can take some insight from, is that your body's going to be stressed from that long run, or from a hard workout as well, a speed workout. But just because it's stressed doesn't mean it shouldn't move or do anything else for the remainder of the day, or maybe the recovery day that you have after that hard effort. Sometimes the best recovery that we can do is active recovery, getting our body moving, allowing blood to circulate, trying to reduce some of that inflammation in our body. And the days where I felt best was when I was able to do my long run, and no matter how I felt later on in that day, I moved and I got my body feeling better. My only goal going into the gym on those days was to walk out feeling better than I did going in. And whatever I did in that gym in the time that I was there was geared towards that goal. Now, that's not the goal every single day I go into the gym, but on those days, I recognized that's what I needed the most as not only a runner, but an athlete.
I love that you brought that up. It's, basically active recovery, right? Like you get to recover hard, and everyone's going to be a little bit different on how that looks. But I do know from experience that when I go out and like take Kenzie for a really light walk, or do mobility or stretching, or even some core work, like after, or some band work, some clamshells, something like that, after a long run, I feel better, and the run the next day feels better. Um, so really lean into that, and don't try and like not do anything for the rest of the day. Or on the other side of things, I've seen people go like on like a 15 to 20-mile bike ride after their 20-mile long run, or something that is very strenuous, and the long run is strenuous enough, whether it's easy or goal pace. You can do some mobility, some things that Austin and I just talked about to really help you feel better, but you don't have to get another workout in. It doesn't make sense to go out for a double or run later in the day. You're just giving yourself or creating a higher risk of injury if you do that. And like we've said on this podcast many, 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 many times, take your easy days easy, your hard days hard. But for the long run, like, don't go too hard after. Like, do enough to just feel better.
Yeah. And I know that one thing that we've discussed in the past is just like how you can invest into yourself and into your training and well-being outside of simply running. It's really easy to, especially if you're working with a coach, or if you're just following a training plan that already has basically your workout structured within it, it's really easy to see the training that you have scheduled. So a 60-minute easy run, a tempo workout, a long run. It's easy to see that as the one and done thing that you need to do as a part of marathon training. And one thing that we really love to talk about, because we see the value in, is that what if you invested a specific amount of time into your recovery, and more specifically, your nutrition? So another thing that I really enjoyed doing on long run days, or even like the day before a long run, which was typically a Friday evening, was prioritizing my nutrition. So I would build more time around making a solid dinner for myself so that I knew I was in a really great place leading into my long run. And then later that evening, one of my favorite times of the week would be Saturday evening, getting to sit down to dinner with Abby, knowing that I had a solid long run, that it was a successful week of training. I was able to reflect on that over a nutritious meal. And that's something that I will continue to value as an athlete, because it makes you feel good. Not only physically, it helps you to recover, but it's also a mental thing too. And just accepting, the importance of that relationship between training, recovery, nutrition, and how all of that affects our ability to train in a healthy way towards a marathon.
Absolutely. I'm glad you said that because I was the exact opposite in my first training cycle. I struggled with nutrition hardcore. I felt like I didn't really need to eat more than I was eating, but I was running, I think Nell got me up to 60 miles or so at my peak. And I remember I was just hungry all the time. And it was a disaster because I also didn't have time to meal prep. So I ended up doing like food delivery service things for like during the week. And then I tried to do things on the weekend, but it was really like actually it was during the pandemic that I worked with a registered dietitian to help me like really like retrain my body on what it needs to be able to run higher mileage with stronger workouts and the right things to fuel my body with when I'm running, when I'm in recovery, um, off season, things like that. So that's been super, super helpful. And I think a lot of us can kind of fall into that trap of like, maybe we're not eating enough, we're not increasing our carbohydrate intake, we're not increasing our calories, and we're just doing whatever we can do to like manage. I definitely have had some athletes over the last few months say, I'm so hungry. And I'm like, I get it. I was there too. You're not eating enough. So you need to eat more, but you also need to eat the right things. So huge learning curve on that side of things for me, but I definitely got it into a better place and you just feel better. You have more energy and you're able to really like knock out those workouts and knock out those long runs um and all the things. It's also important to eat and fuel and consume gels and calories when you're running. That's a big piece to it, especially the long run. Um, 200 to 300 calories per hour. Practice what you're going to be taking on race day. It's a huge, huge piece to being able to set yourself up for not only a strong long run, but also a strong race.
Yeah, that's really valuable. I'm glad you mentioned the idea of using nutrition on your runs. That's really crucial, and just finding what works for you, because when you first start taking in food during a run, and by food typically that means liquid calories or a gel, it's really crucial to find what works for you, because not every product out there will work for you. So be willing to experiment. And that's just a lesson for the entirety of, preparing for a marathon and what that process takes. Be willing to experiment, be willing to mess up at times, and just embrace the fact that you messing up, if that's your perception of it, actually represents a lesson learned. Sarah, you mentioned that you were struggling with nutrition in your marathon prep. I know that that's probably a strength of yours right now, as you're now much deeper into your running career. Although I feel like I was in a good place with my nutrition in that first marathon prep, I can tell you that I've come an extremely long way since that first prep. And that was only a year ago. I ran my first marathon this past November, and my second marathon will be a year, or excuse me, my third marathon will be a year to the day of my first marathon. So you can learn so much in a short period of time if you're just willing to learn and embrace that. And then ending on the topic of nutrition, one of the things that I've heard tossed around recently that I really love is that it's okay to tap into what your body's craving. Like, your body is most likely sending you signals in some way of what you want to eat or what's going to fuel you for those efforts. And it's okay to tap into that and to embrace that. If you are craving a certain type of food, let your body have that type of food and see how you perform as a result of that. See how you recover as a result of that, because what you are consuming is going to fuel you. It's going to allow you to recover better and be a stronger athlete ultimately.
Absolutely. It definitely, definitely will, and it goes to show, over planning and over preparing for your training goes hand in hand with the fueling and the nutrition side of things too. And it's really, really important to show up for your training, to do everything you can do, and maybe it's the consistency, the hard work, getting all your runs in, getting the strength training and nutrition dialed in. And maybe it's also taking a long run and maybe like bumping it up a notch and maybe like taking it to the hills if you know you have a hilly second half of a run or race. Or you have a lot of downhill in your run and making sure that your body is really practicing that downhill ascent so your quads get stronger. You're doing things specifically in the gym to help your legs and your quads. I know for sure, like on Saturday, I ran a 21-mile long run. It was progressive. I decided based on the route I was going that I was going to take the last 4 miles of marathon pace on an incline. If you live in Denver, I was running on the Cherry Creek Trail up to Wash Park and ran on the hill from Spear to Downing, which is a pretty nice hill, and then inside the park, which has rolling hills. And the cool part to it is that I wanted to test my mental strength. I wanted to hit goal pace at for the last 4 miles on an incline because Chicago is flat. Chicago has a hill at the end, but it's like not I don't think it's gonna be that bad. I guess talk to me after the race. But I really wanted to like over prepare and overtrain. And I had someone actually tell me after the fact on Instagram, like, you didn't have to do that. And I'm like, yeah, you're right, I did it, but I chose to do that. I chose to take the last 4 miles at goal pace on a harder terrain than I needed to see and test my body and my mind to see if I could do it. Now, the last mile I hit like 7:13, 7:14. Goal pace range is 7:15 to 7:30. I'm gonna leave it at that. Um, and I was in around 7:20 for those other miles, but when we actually looked at NGP, which is kind of like the net, it kind of takes away like any sort of, terrain that would deter you from hitting your pace, right? So like any sort of like um yeah, any sort of terrain or elements that would make your run harder, it actually turned into I was running like half marathon pace. So like my effort was there, right? But I was running on a hill. So that's a long way to say like you can over plan, over prepare for training. A lot of times it happens really in your workouts. You have a track workout, let's say you have 5 by 1K, take it to the road. It's going to be harder, and if you can hit pace or have effort, it's a great way to train for CIM. I trained all my track workouts on the inner loop at Wash Park. It's rolling hills, just like CIM is, and it worked like a charm. I had a very strong race. It's actually my best race so far until Chicago.
Yeah, I love the concept of over planning, over preparing, and honestly, just over obsessing towards a goal. Identify what you want to do and find an obsession over pursuing that goal and achieving that goal. Because what I've found in my own life, and Sarah, I'm sure that you can relate to this, is that me pursuing this goal teaches me so many things about myself. It teaches me what I can do and all that I can pursue outside of just running. And I can tell you that what I've committed to running over the past year, those lessons learned about myself is now being applied to my life as a professional and pursuing this new job that I get the opportunity to work within, a dream of an opportunity that I feel like I'm more prepared for because a year ago, I decided to train for my first marathon and I decided to not take that lightly. because you should not take what you want to do lightly. Pursue it with a passion. Be willing to learn and find out things about yourself and just the craft of it. So the craft of running, the best practices and the training strategies for training for a marathon. Find people that you can look up to within the space. Success leaves clues. Find out what they're doing. Try things out. See if they work for you, and don't let it, hinder your feeling towards the process if something doesn't work for you. That's perfectly okay. But when you over plan and you over prepare, now that doesn't mean running yourself into the ground. That's not what we're talking about.
Right.
Really, what we're talking about is just thinking through the process in such a detailed way, as if these important runs, like a long run or like a key workout, is race day. And that's what we've talked about many times. We talked about it multiple times in the context of my last marathon prep, is that I'm simulating race day multiple times leading into actual race day because I want to know what it's going to feel like on that day. And that's what it means to over plan and over prepare, is that I'm going to try to think through all of these things that can happen in all of these ways that I can be best prepared when it is time to race. Because ultimately, when I am the most prepared on race day, I get to enjoy the process even more. I get to enjoy those 26.2 miles as opposed to feeling like I wasn't prepared and I did something wrong to the point that I need to, question why I even chose to do this. You want to run that first marathon with confidence and really get to enjoy it. And you can do that by being very tactful in your approach to planning and preparing in the weeks and months that lead into that race.
Yeah, I mean, I had to laugh and smile when you said, when you had that last comment, Austin, like, I remember the last 5K of CIM, I thought to myself, you never have to run again. Like, just hold pace and like keep going. And here I am, a running coach. I'm on my fourth marathon. And the marathon's a trippy sort of distance, and it definitely gets most of us because it's a fun distance to run, to train for, and to conquer. And for most of us, it takes many, many, many races to be able to officially like conquer the race. Like for me, it's sub 3. And then after that, I'll probably still run marathons, but like ones that I want to run for fun and not do this intense training, because as much as I love the training right now, it is a lot of time and it's a lot of energy, and there's certain sacrifices that I have to make right now so I am set up for success in training. But it's still at the end of the day what I love to do, and it should be also something that you all love to do too, deep down in some way, or have your why attached to the goal of finishing a race and really leaning into that.
Yeah, you really hit it exactly the way that I think is a great way to wrap up this episode, which is establish why you want to train for a marathon before you even begin the process. For me, it was about it was a few things, and chances are that for you, there's going to be a few different reasons that you want to train for and pursue that. For me, and Sarah, you can share here in a moment what you feel like your why was. For me, I wanted to embrace a process. I wanted something that was going to provide a level of structure in my life. So, leaving my career as a teacher, I wanted something that I would wake up every single day and know that I was going to accomplish. And that was running and performing a training run for that day. And that level of structure in turn taught me lessons about myself. What do I need to do to stick to that structure? What do I need to do to perform at a better level than I did last week? And when you identify that why, it really helps you to push through those moments where you're struggling, because you're not leaning on the external gratification of what others may see if you're posting things on social media, or if you just told someone that you're going to run a marathon and you feel like you have to hold yourself accountable for that. Those things don't last. But what will last is the agreement that you've made with yourself and the reason that you want to do it for yourself, as opposed to doing it just to say that you ran a marathon. Because at the end of the day, it's all about what you can get out of it by putting in the work and the effort and being willing to learn from that process.
Absolutely. That's a great way to wrap for today. This was an awesome conversation. I know Austin and I were both very excited to record this, so we hope you all loved it. If you would like to rate, subscribe, send us your elevated moments, we would love for you to do that. If you want to find me on social, you can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Sayra, SAYRAH runs happy, and Elevate Your Running. Austin, where can they find you?
You can find me on Instagram at Austin Myers 12. We appreciate you tuning in for another episode of the Elevate Your Running podcast. As we mentioned earlier on, if you would like to share your elevated moments with us, you can connect with us on the socials that we just shared. You can also send an elevated moment to elevate your running podcast at gmail.com. Did I get that email right, Sarah?
You got it.
I got it. Thank you, everyone, for listening. We look forward to you joining us again next week as we help you to continue your running journey and really just fall in love with that process.
Yeah. Have a great week, everyone.